Sir, move to the back. This seat isn't for people like you. That's what a flight attendant said, out loud, to a calm black man sitting in first class with a paid ticket, ID, and platinum status. No apology. No double check. Just pure humiliation in front of a full cabin of silent witnesses. But what she didn't know, that man owned a massive stake in the airline. And in the next 72 hours, she would lose her job, the airline would collapse into scandal, and the entire industry would change forever. If you've ever been judged by how you look, where you're from, or what people assume, hit that subscribe button, because every subscriber is one more voice standing up to injustice. Don't miss the stories that are changing systems and demanding dignity, one seat at a time. The cabin lights had just dimmed for pre-boarding as the final call rang out. Flight 983 to Seattle, boarding now at gate C15. Passengers lined up with their roller bags, chatting, yawning, or tapping at their phones. But no one expected what was about to unfold in seat 1C. Sir, this area is reserved for premium passengers, the flight attendant said, her voice slicing through the low hum of boarding noise. Her name tag read Heather Connolly, and she wore the perfectly pressed navy and gold uniform of Northern Pacific Airlines. Her brows were furrowed, her tone flat but unmistakably patronizing. Across from her, seated calmly in the aisle seat of first class, was Daniel Brooks. Mid-30s, well-groomed but casually dressed in worn jeans, a simple dark green hoodie, and well-used brown leather shoes. A black man with thoughtful eyes, he barely looked up from his phone when Heather addressed him. "I'm aware," Daniel said, not moving, his voice calm. "This is my assigned seat." Heather blinked as if she hadn't heard him correctly. "Excuse me." He tapped the screen of his phone and turned it toward her. The screen showed an official Northern Pacific Airlines boarding pass. Large bold letters read, Seat 1C, First Class. Heather hesitated for a moment. She leaned in, looked at the phone, then frowned. "May I see your ID, sir?" she asked sharply, now standing upright with her tablet in hand. The energy shifted. Around them, several first-class passengers paused, glancing over. A middle-aged white man 2 rows back tilted his phone toward the scene, recording. A younger woman whispered to the person next to her. Daniel reached calmly into his wallet and produced his state-issued driver's license. "Daniel Brooks." "That's me." Heather gave a tight smile. There might have been a system error," she said, tapping her tablet. "We've had incidents of digital boarding pass mix-ups. Just to confirm, did you perhaps mean to book coach?" "I purchased this ticket 3 weeks ago," Daniel said without raising his voice. "First class. Full fare." At this point, another flight attendant approached. Karen Lowell, a senior attendant, leaned in. "Heather, what's the issue?" she asked in a low voice, but loud enough that the 2 women in 2A and 2B could hear. "This gentleman is confused about his seat assignment," Heather replied. "He's claiming he is seat 1C in first class." Karen squinted at Daniel, then gave a tight-lipped smile. "Sir, can I take a look at your boarding pass again?" Daniel handed over his phone. Karen looked, then handed it back without comment. Heather, however, continued pressing on her tablet. "Sir, the system shows you booked an economy ticket. Row 21, middle seat," Heather said flatly. Daniel's brow furrowed for the first time. "That's incorrect. Would you please double-check your records? I received a confirmation email, and I have all the details right here." Heather rolled her eyes slightly. "Sir, our system is the source of truth. If it says 21B, then that's your seat." A businessman in 1A leaned toward Daniel. He was in his late 50s, gray hair, navy blazer, expensive-looking briefcase by his feet. "Maybe it's just a mistake," he said gently. "You don't want to hold up the flight. I'm sure they'll sort it out for you back in coach." Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small, leather-bound card holder. He placed a platinum card on the tray table with an audible clack. 850,000 miles flown, he said. Northern Pacific Platinum status for 8 straight years. For international segments just last month. Heather barely looked at the card. "Sir, anyone can buy those online these days." That was when the phones came out in force. Across the first-class cabin, at least a dozen passengers were now recording. One woman in 3D was live-streaming on TikTok, whispering, "Yo, this flight attendant is really trying him." Another passenger, a travel blogger with the handle at Coastal Nomad, began live-tweeting the exchange. Live from gate C15, black man with full documentation being asked to vacate his first-class seat. "Northern Pacific Airlines, what are we doing in 2025? Daniel stayed in his seat, calm but resolute. "Ma'am," he said, looking up at Heather, I'm not moving from my seat without proper verification. I paid for it. I earned it. I'm not going to be shamed into the back because I don't look the way you expected a first-class passenger to look. Heather's lips pressed into a thin line. You're being uncooperative. I'm calling the captain. Please do, Daniel replied. Karen was already whispering into her radio. Moments later, the cockpit door opened, and Captain Ron Mahoney stepped out. A tall, imposing man in his early 60s, he wore his cap low and his uniform crisp. A name badge reading Captain Mahoney, R. What's the holdup? He asked. Heather pointed toward Daniel without looking at him. This passenger is refusing to move to his assigned seating, coach. We believe he's trying to upgrade himself fraudulently. Daniel handed over his documents once again. Boarding pass, ID, frequent flyer card. Captain Mahoney glanced at them, then gave Daniel a tight nod. Sir, I've been flying commercial for 27 years. I've seen all kinds of schemes. You may have printed that boarding pass or gotten lucky with a glitch, but I'm telling you, right now, you're disrupting the flight. We're behind schedule. Either take your assigned seat in the back or leave the plane. Daniel, still buckled in, pulled out his phone. He held it up and pressed record. For the record, he said clearly, it is 3:14 p.m. on April 17, 2025. I am being asked to vacate a first-class seat I paid for, with full documentation, based solely on speculation from flight staff who have refused to validate my documents. This is racial profiling. This is discrimination. Captain Mahoney's face darkened. Put that phone away now. I'm documenting, Daniel replied. I have every right to record my own treatment. Back in row 2, a white woman with cropped blonde hair stood up. He showed his ID, she said, turning toward the captain. He showed everything. Why are you still treating him like a criminal? Heather stepped toward her. Ma'am, please return to your seat. The woman didn't move. This feels like racism, she said bluntly. Because I've seen people get in the wrong seat before, and they just get politely redirected. Another man in 4A looked up from his laptop. Actually, same here. He's sitting quietly and complying. What are we even arguing about? Captain Mahoney's eyes flicked between the passengers, then back to Heather. Call gate security, he ordered. Heather nodded and spoke into her radio. Gate 15, we need ground security at the aircraft. Passenger refusing to comply. Daniel sat back, arms crossed. Sir, please, don't make this more difficult, Karen said. It's already difficult, he replied. But I'm not the one making it that way. Two uniformed airport security officers stepped onto the aircraft with the kind of practiced calm that suggested they'd done this dance before. Their presence drew more phones up into the air. One of them, a burly black man in his late 40s with a kind face, led the way. His badge read, Officer Terrence Ward. Behind him walked Officer Natalie Kim, younger, wiry, sharp-eyed. Captain Mahoney quickly stepped aside and pointed down the aisle. It's the gentleman in 1C. He's refusing to follow crew instructions. Officer Ward raised a brow and took a few steps forward until he was standing beside Daniel Brooks. Sir, what seems to be the issue today? He asked in a tone that was respectful, not confrontational. Daniel handed over his documents without a word. Boarding pass, ID, platinum loyalty card. Ward inspected them carefully while Natalie looked over his shoulder. The two exchanged a glance. Captain, Ward said slowly, these documents show he is ticketed for seat 1C, first class. Full fare. Heather leaned forward sharply. That's not what our system shows. He's trying to scam the upgrade. Officer Ward's face didn't move, but his eyes narrowed slightly. These boarding passes come from your system. If there's a mistake, it's on your end. Captain Mahoney's posture stiffened. The man is being disruptive. Ward turned back to Daniel. Sir, have you raised your voice or made any threats? No, Daniel replied evenly. I've been sitting in my assigned seat and asking the crew to validate their own error. That's it. Got it. Behind them, murmurs spread like ripples in a pond. The woman from 2D spoke again. So you're saying your records are more accurate than his boarding pass? She asked Heather, clearly frustrated. Heather replied without looking at her. Ma'am, with all due respect, this is airline policy. Is that what you're calling this? Another voice chimed in from 3B, a black woman with glasses and a Cornell University tote bag in her lap. Because it feels a lot like racial bias dressed up in policy. Heather's face reddened slightly. Please, don't interfere. The woman folded her arms. I'm not interfering. I'm observing. Daniel sat silently through the exchange, watching everything with an air of contained fury. Ward took a step back and gently said, Mr. Brooks, I'd like to ask you to step off the plane with me for just a moment. We'll speak with the gate agent and get this clarified. It won't take long. Daniel considered it. His jaw was tight, but he nodded. All right. As long as you understand I'm not volunteering. I'm complying under protest. Understood. As Daniel rose, he grabbed his worn leather briefcase and his phone buzzed again. A quick glance at the screen. A text message from a number labeled simply, board. Conference room C has been prepped. Emergency session at your signal. The woman in 3B caught the text as he closed his screen and raised an eyebrow. Who has emergency board meetings during flight delays? She thought. The crowd shifted as Daniel stepped into the aisle. People murmured, filmed, whispered. As he and the officers exited the aircraft, the live stream by a Coastal Nomad ticked past 2,100 viewers. The caption now read, "This man just got walked off his first-class seat by airport security. Boarding pass and ID in hand. This is what discrimination looks like in 2025. Back at the gate, passengers gathered. A teenage girl was already posting videos on TikTok, and a business consultant in a sleek gray suit updated his LinkedIn status with a headline. When assumptions cost companies everything, what I witnessed at Gate C15 today will become a business school case study. The gate supervisor on duty, Michelle Reyes, arrived at a brisk pace, clipboard in hand. She had worked at Northern Pacific for 14 years, rising through every rung from check-in counter to gate operations manager. She was good at her job, and she knew something smelled off the moment she saw the crowd and all the cell phones. "What's the issue?" she asked as she approached Officer Ward, who was reviewing Daniel's documents again. "Passenger claims a first-class seat. Documents support that. Crew says system shows economy ticket," he summarized crisply. Reyes glanced at the boarding pass and scanned the barcode with her own tablet. Her screen flickered. Then came the chime. Seat 1C, verified, first class, full fare. She blinked, then looked up at Daniel. "Mr. Brooks, I apologize. This does appear to be entirely in order. Tell that to the captain and flight crew," Daniel said. Reyes hesitated, then said, "They were working off outdated information. I'll correct that." Daniel stared at her. Outdated information doesn't justify humiliation. The woman from 3B had now stepped off the plane too and joined the group. "I was watching," she said. The flight attendant never even looked at his ID properly. She just assumed he didn't belong. Reyes looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, thank you for your concern. This will be reviewed." Daniel looked at Reyes, then at the two officers. "I'd like to speak with your regional director," he said calmly. Reyes shook her head. "I'm the most senior supervisor on duty." "I see," Daniel said. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a slim business card holder, and selected one card. "You may want to call the number listed here." She took it, and her eyes widened. It read, Daniel L. Brooks, Chief Executive Officer, Brooks Strategic Holdings. The color drained from her face. Brooks Strategic Holdings was a name that, in her world, meant power. They were on the board of multiple Fortune 500 companies, airline industry included. Reyes looked back at the aircraft door. I'll inform the captain," she said. At that moment, Officer Ward leaned closer to Daniel. "Sir, just out of curiosity, you're that Daniel Brooks? From BSH?" Daniel didn't answer, but his eyes said everything. "I thought so," Ward nodded, almost smiling. "Well, damn." Daniel turned to face the gathering crowd. He didn't raise his voice, but the room seemed to fall silent anyway. "I'd like to make a statement," he said. Phones pointed at him like spotlights. "I was asked to leave my seat, not because I didn't have the right documents, but because someone didn't believe I looked the part. That assumption wasn't questioned. It was treated as fact. That's not a system error. That's a systemic one." The room held its breath. "Today, I was publicly humiliated because someone saw my skin, my hoodie, my jeans, and thought I didn't belong. But what I wear doesn't determine my worth. And this airline is about to learn why that matters." He turned back toward Michelle Reyes. "Call your district manager. I'll wait." Phones were buzzing. Texts were flying. One of the streams now had 3,200 live viewers. The consultant with the LinkedIn post muttered to himself, "This is going to be in every business ethics class within a year." The woman from 3B? She was smiling now. She knew a reckoning was coming. But no one was ready for what Daniel would reveal next. Not the airline, not the captain, not even the boardroom watching from behind the scenes. The waiting area near Gate C15 no longer felt like an airport. It felt like a courtroom. Passengers weren't just watching. They were judging, filming, whispering. reacting in real time as if history were unfolding in front of them, because in a way, it was. Daniel Brooks stood calmly by the gate podium, his hands clasped behind his back. The gate supervisor, Michelle Reyes, held his business card like it was evidence in a federal trial. She had called her district manager's number twice. No answer. And Daniel, though patient, was clearly done playing polite. Behind them, Officer Terrence Ward glanced at his partner and muttered, "Something tells me this isn't your average customer complaint." Michelle finally found her voice. "Mr. Brooks, I want to assure you that we're taking this seriously." Daniel interrupted, not unkindly but firmly. "Miss Reyes, I believe it's time I escalate the matter myself." He pulled out his phone and tapped a contact titled simply, A. Wallace, Chair. He stepped away for privacy, but everyone could see the call screen, connecting to Arthur Wallace, Chairman, Board of Northern Pacific Airlines. Around him, the crowd's eyes widened. Even Officer Kim blinked. Did he just say Chairman? Less than a minute later, Daniel ended the call, returned to the podium, and said, "Your headquarters will be calling you shortly. You'll want to take that." Reyes gave a nervous laugh. "Mr. Brooks, are you suggesting you contacted the board of directors directly?" "I'm not suggesting," he replied. "I'm stating." As if on cue, the terminal phone beside her began to ring. The display read, "Internal, HQ, Priority 1. Reyes hesitated. Picked it up. 8C15. "This is Reyes." "Yes. Yes, he is." "Yes, I understand." Immediately, she hung up. Her posture had shifted. She no longer looked like a gate supervisor. She looked like someone reporting to someone far above her pay grade. Turning back to Daniel, she said with restrained composure, "The CEO of Northern Pacific Airlines would like to speak with you." Patch it through. Passengers watching gasped. One whispered, "Wait, asterisk, he's not just a CEO. He's connected to their CEO?" Another person muttered, "You're telling me this guy got kicked off a flight by a flight attendant, and now he's on the phone with corporate?" The crowd had grown to at least 40. 8C15 looked more like a TED Talk venue than a boarding area. Even a Starbucks barista had stepped out from behind her kiosk to watch. Daniel raised the phone to his ear. "Ms. Langston," he said smoothly. On the other end was Rachel Langston, CEO of Northern Pacific Airlines, gravel-voiced, pragmatic, no nonsense. "Daniel," she said, "what the hell is going on at C15? He didn't miss a beat. Racial profiling. Systemic negligence. Public humiliation. That's what's going on." Langston exhaled sharply. "I saw the trending tag. You're already up to 4,000 tweets. Not bad for a 30-minute delay. We'll fix this." Daniel shook his head, even though she couldn't see him. "Not good enough. Not anymore. I'm not looking for an upgrade. I'm looking for a full accountability review. I want names, timestamps, personnel records, and incident transcripts submitted to the Ethics Compliance Committee within 12 hours. Daniel, you know how slow these systems move. I also know how fast they move when it's a white CEO being dragged off a plane in handcuffs," he said, voice clipped. "We both know the board can trigger emergency action in under an hour. In fact, they're doing that now, aren't they?" Rachel was silent. "I'm on a private line with your chairman in 15 minutes, Daniel continued. "You might want to join." More silence. "I'll be watching," he said, and ended the call. The passengers didn't hear her voice, but the tension in the air had thickened. Someone clapped softly. Then a second person. Within seconds, the crowd at gate C15 was applauding. Michelle Reyes stood frozen. The applause wasn't for her airline. It was for the man who had just dropped a corporate bombshell without even raising his voice. Daniel turned back to the gathered crowd. "I want to thank all of you for witnessing what happened here," he said. "Your recordings, your posts, your attention, it matters." The woman from 3B, still recording on her phone, stepped forward. "Sir, what is your position exactly?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Daniel smiled faintly. "I'm the founder and CEO of Brooks Strategic Holdings. We're the second largest shareholder in Northern Pacific Airlines. We own just under 19% of its outstanding stock." Someone gasped. "POW's part of the airline?" Another whispered that flight attendant's career just flatlined. Daniel wasn't finished. "Last year, my company spent $9.2 million on corporate travel. Northern Pacific received the lion's share of that. Over 500 business class flights. Over 100 in first class." Michelle Reyes looked like she just realized she was standing on a landmine. "And if I hadn't been treated the way I was today," Daniel continued, "I might have written another check this year. But instead, He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sleek black folder. On the cover was a golden emblem of Brooks Strategic Holdings. I've started the review process for divestment, and I've informed our travel director to suspend all bookings with Northern Pacific, effective immediately. The ripple that moved through the crowd was visible. Passengers weren't just witnessing a customer being wronged anymore. They were watching a man dismantle part of an empire he helped fund. I didn't want this, Daniel said, voice steady. I wanted a quiet seat, a smooth trip. Instead, I got assumptions, dismissal, disrespect. He looked directly at Michelle. And now, you get reform. Behind them, the TV near the gate lit up with breaking news headlines from 3 national networks. The story had gone national in under an hour. At that moment, Michelle's radio crackled. Reyes, this is Ops. You're to immediately escort Mr. Brooks to the executive lounge and await a secured line call from HQ. The chairman will join within minutes. Michelle looked at Daniel like she'd been struck by lightning. He nodded. Let's go. As they began walking, the crowd stepped aside to let them pass. The woman from 3B lowered her phone, shook her head, and whispered. They thought they were dealing with another nobody. Turns out, they just insulted one of the owners. But the truth was, Daniel wasn't just carrying stock. He was carrying leverage, data, and a plan to restructure an entire airline from the inside. The executive lounge at Terminal C was quiet. Too quiet. Designed with marble floors, glass walls, and soft jazz humming through hidden speakers, it was usually a space reserved for elite travelers, CEOs, and the kind of people who didn't wait in lines. They erased them. But today, the tension inside was louder than any music. Daniel Brooks sat in a high-back leather chair, legs crossed, briefcase by his side. In front of him, gate supervisor Michelle Reyes paced nervously, phone in hand, waiting for the incoming call from headquarters. The lounge attendant had already offered him champagne. He declined. You'll want something stronger by the end of this, Daniel had told her politely. Michelle's radio buzzed. Incoming secure line from boardroom 12. Stand by. She swallowed hard. It wasn't just any call. It was coming directly from the airline's crisis response team. Just outside the lounge, the crowd was still gathered near gate C15, filming, tweeting, whispering. Live streams had surged past 10,000 viewers. Northern Pacific's social team was frantically trying to manage the digital wildfire. But the match had already been dropped, and Daniel Brooks was the fire. The call connected. Mr. Brooks, this is Arthur Wallace, chairman of the board, came the deep voice through the lounge's secure speaker. Arthur, Daniel replied calmly. Glad to hear from you. I'd say likewise, but we've got a problem. Daniel leaned forward, folding his hands. Correction. You have a problem. I have a decision. Wallace sighed on the line. We're aware of the incident. We've seen the video. Rachel's already briefed me. Then you know this isn't about one bad employee, Daniel replied. It's about a systemic failure, one that now comes with a shareholder attached to a viral discrimination scandal. A pause. Mr. Brooks, may I ask what you intend to do? Daniel pulled a folder from his briefcase, opened it, and laid several documents out on the coffee table. Michelle leaned forward instinctively, but Daniel slid them just out of reach. Within this folder, Daniel said, are 6 years of travel expenditure data from Brooks Strategic Holdings. Over 1,400 flights. $9.2 million in booked travel. Northern Pacific has received 64% of that. And you know why? Because of our loyalty program? No. Because I believed in your leadership, Daniel replied coldly. Because I thought you were serious when you made all those statements in 2020 about diversity and inclusion. Another silence. Daniel continued, voice steady. And yet, today I was asked to move to the back of the plane. Not because of a technical error, but because I didn't look like your idea of first class. Wallace didn't argue. I'm activating clause 17.3 of the shareholder agreement, Daniel said. Michelle's head snapped up. Wallace's tone tightened. That clause triggers a governance review. I know, Daniel replied. I helped write it. On a nearby screen, a livestock tracker showed Northern Pacific's shares dipping by 1.6%. The trending hashtag Northern Discrimination was now being picked up by MSNBC, The Guardian, and Reuters. Daniel rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the tarmac. A new plane was taxiing in, a symbol of movement, of direction. One Northern Pacific flight arriving, as another prepared to be grounded by scandal. Arthur, Daniel said without turning, you have two choices. I'm listening. Choice 1. You issue a public apology. Immediate termination of the involved personnel. Full-scale audit of internal bias handling procedures. Launch a third-party reporting system. Tie executive bonuses to diversity performance. And I mean this quarter. And choice 2. Wallace asked carefully. I liquidate our holdings. And I recommend all 6 of our partner companies, who collectively spend over $70 million annually on air travel, to sever ties with Northern Pacific within 48 hours. A sharp intake of breath. I've already spoken to Delta's procurement team. They'd love to have our volume back. Michelle sat down slowly. She looked like she had just realized she was seated on a sinking ship. Wallace's voice returned, lower now. If we take path 1, will you reconsider divestment? Daniel turned from the window. Depends on your execution. Words are cheap. I want implementation. We'll need time. You have 72 hours. That's impossible. Your company can reroute 200 flights during a snowstorm in 6 hours, Daniel said flatly. Don't tell me what's impossible. The silence that followed felt like thunder. Finally, Wallace said, you'll have our full cooperation. Daniel nodded once. I'll draft the remediation roadmap. Expect it by COB today. Michelle opened her mouth to speak, but Daniel cut in. Oh, and before I forget, he said, walking back to the table. He retrieved another document. 6 months ago, the Brooks Foundation made a donation to fund Northern Pacific's pilot bias training program. $500,000. Michelle blinked. Daniel held up the final page, a certificate of donation with the airline's own logo stamped on it. That money came from my personal trust. Wallace responded faintly. I wasn't aware of that. Exactly, Daniel said. You accepted my help to fix your culture, and then let me get humiliated by the very disease I was trying to treat. The room went still. Outside the lounge, passengers pressed against the glass trying to hear. Inside the terminal, live streams buzzed with disbelief. At Watchdog Aviation posted, he funded their diversity program, and they still profiled him. This isn't a story. This is a damn reckoning. Arthur Wallace's voice returned. This time, it was firm. We'll begin immediate implementation. Good, Daniel replied. Because the storm has already begun. Just then, the door to the lounge opened. A young woman in a blazer entered, holding a tablet. Sir, she said, breathless. There's a media crew at the gate asking for a statement. Do you want to address them? Daniel looked around the room. At the frozen Michelle. At the incoming calls buzzing from legal teams. At the live updates pinging across the room's central screen. And he smiled. Not yet, he said. We're just getting started. But when Daniel finally steps in front of the cameras, he doesn't just call out the airline. He triggers a transformation that will shake the entire industry. By the time Daniel Brooks stepped out of the executive lounge and walked back toward gate C15, the scene had completely transformed. There were now 3 media outlets with cameras set up. A Northern Pacific Airlines corporate communications officer was awkwardly pacing with a stack of pre-written talking points, none of which could address what was about to happen. Across the terminal, hashtag Northern Discrimination was trending on every major social platform. Viewers on TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, and even LinkedIn were tuned in. Daniel's name was everywhere, paired with phrases like, he owns part of the airline. CEO dragged off his own investment. The passenger who turned the plane around. Passengers were still waiting at the gate, unsure if the flight would ever board. But no one was complaining. They were glued to the unfolding drama like it was a courtroom thriller. A familiar voice called out, Mr. Brooks, over here. It was Dr. Leah Morris, the woman from seat.They, still recording. Would you like to speak on record? She asked. Daniel stopped, smiled faintly. I think now's the right time. The crowd parted. Phones came up again. The reporters scrambled to reset their mics. Daniel stood in front of the gate podium, the Northern Pacific logo behind him. My name is Daniel Brooks, he began. I'm the founder and CEO of Brooks Strategic Holdings, and I'm one of Northern Pacific Airlines' largest private shareholders. Gasps echoed through the gate like cannon shots. This morning, I boarded Flight 983 to Seattle with a first-class ticket, full documentation, and platinum status. I was told, by a flight attendant who never properly checked my credentials, that I didn't belong in that seat. I was removed, humiliated, and accused of attempting to scam an upgrade. He paused. Let the weight of that hang in the air. Had I been anyone else, someone without resources, without platform, without proof, This would have been yet another quiet injustice swept away by procedure and silence. But not today. Someone clapped. Then others. The room was erupting again. I've triggered Clause 17.3 of the shareholder agreement, he continued, which forces the board to conduct a governance review in response to incidents involving discrimination and reputational damage. The reporters scrambled to take notes. Even the communications officer had frozen, his talking points useless now. I've given Northern Pacific Airlines a 72-hour mandate, Daniel said. Immediate termination of involved personnel, implementation of third-party reporting, public transparency, and for the first time in this airline's history, executive compensation tied to diversity outcomes. Reporters raised hands to ask questions, but Daniel held up one hand. And if they fail, he added, my company will divest our holdings, and we will coordinate with our 6 travel partners to shift their $70 million in annual flight spending elsewhere. This is not a threat. It's a consequence. Behind the cameras, a young intern monitoring the airline's stock price turned pale. Northern Pacific is down 3.1% in the last hour, she whispered to her boss. It's still falling. Daniel's phone buzzed again. An incoming call, Patricia Langston, CEO, Northern Pacific Airlines. He answered and pressed speaker. Daniel, Patricia said. Her voice had the edge of someone who'd just walked out of a 3-alarm boardroom fire. We're implementing your list. HR has already started termination proceedings for the flight crew involved. What about the public apology? Daniel asked. You'll have it within the hour. Legal is finalizing the statement. He turned slightly so the crowd could hear her. And what about the diversity performance metrics? There was a pause. Then Patricia said clearly, effective immediately, 20% of all executive bonuses will be tied to measurable improvements in bias reduction and equity audits. The crowd at the gate erupted again. Daniel ended the call and turned back to the cameras. You see, when systems fail to protect people, we don't need more apologies. We need accountability, leverage, pressure. He stepped aside. The gate was quiet again. Everyone was waiting to see what he'd do next. A flight agent appeared nervously. Mr. Brooks, your seat in 1C has been reissued. We're ready to board. Same aircraft? He asked. Yes, sir. Same captain? The agent hesitated. No, sir. Captain Mahoney has been temporarily relieved of duty. Daniel gave a small nod. Then let's fly. But just as he turned to walk down the jet bridge, a young woman stepped forward from the crowd, holding a manila envelope. She was in her 20s, dressed in a simple pantsuit, her eyes brimming with emotion. Mr. Brooks, she said quietly, my name is Angela Reed. I experienced the same thing on a United flight last year. I filed a complaint. They closed it in 4 days with no explanation. They told me it was a data mismatch. Daniel looked at her gently. Did you document it? I tried, she said. But no one believed me. You're not alone anymore. He took the envelope from her. We're building something. Stay connected. We'll use this. She nodded, tears forming. Thank you. Daniel turned and walked down the jet bridge. But this time, he wasn't just a passenger reclaiming his seat. He was a force, armed with evidence, voice, and millions of eyes watching. He boarded quietly, sat in 1C, opened his laptop, and typed one line into a shared document. Phase 2. Industry-wide enforcement model. But as the plane ascends, Daniel isn't finished. At 30,000 feet, a second wave of action begins, one that will rewrite corporate policy far beyond the skies. The jet engines hummed as Flight 983 finally pushed back from Gate C-15, 83 minutes late, but no one seemed to care anymore. Daniel Brooks sat in seat 1C, calm and composed. To anyone else, he looked like just another frequent flyer. But his laptop screen told a different story. A living document titled Northern Pacific Reform Plan, Phase 1, was open, updated in real time by his legal and ethics teams. As the aircraft climbed above 30,000 feet, Daniel wasn't watching movies or sipping champagne. He was coordinating an unprecedented internal overhaul, one that would transform Northern Pacific Airlines within 72 hours, or break it. Hour 1, terminations. Back in the airline's San Francisco headquarters, CEO Patricia Langston entered a private conference room. With her were legal counsel, the HR director, and 2 security personnel. Let's begin, she said curtly. Within minutes, formal termination letters were issued for Heather Connolly, the flight attendant who initiated the confrontation, Captain Ron Mahoney, for failure to verify and escalating without cause. Karen Lowell, complicit and dismissive of Daniel's documentation. HR officials escorted them from the building. Meanwhile, at Gate C-15, news of the dismissals reached passengers still lingering out of curiosity. Dr. Leah Morris, now off the flight, texted Daniel, "They fired the crew." In public, everyone stunned. He replied with a single line, "Good. Now they're listening." Hour 9, Crisis Response Center activated. Northern Pacific's internal ethics hotline had never seen more than 20 calls per week. Now, it was replaced overnight with a third-party reporting platform, complete with live dashboards, AI-backed bias detection, and a whistleblower protection framework. Daniel's team oversaw the contract. Within 3 hours of activation, the system logged 53 new complaints, including past ignored cases, like the one from Angela Reed, the young woman who had handed Daniel the manila envelope. Her complaint was immediately reopened. A legal rep from the airline called her that evening with a personal apology and an invitation to join a customer advisory council. Angela cried. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. Hour 20, the public apology. At 8 a.m. Pacific time, Northern Pacific Airlines released a public video across every platform. CEO Patricia Langston appeared on screen, visibly shaken but resolute. "I want to speak directly to our passengers, our employees, and the public. What happened to Mr. Daniel Brooks aboard Flight 983 was unacceptable. Our initial response failed. Our systems failed. Our judgment failed. We have accepted full accountability. We are implementing immediate reforms, not tomorrow, not next quarter, but today." The video trended on YouTube, reached 1.2 million views in the first 4 hours, and received praise from unlikely corners. Even critics admitted, it didn't feel like PR. It felt real. Daniel, however, remained cautious. "Apologies are a beginning," he wrote on LinkedIn, "not a conclusion." Hour 36, internal culture reset. Every Northern Pacific employee, from baggage handlers to VPs, received a directive. Mandatory bias recognition training 8 hours, complete within 30 days. The first 500 employees began training immediately. Daniel's team had pre-approved the content, structured it with real case studies, and even consulted with former victims of discrimination to develop role-playing scenarios. One of the stories used in the training? Angela Reed's. She didn't just become part of the change, she became the reason for it. Hour 51. Stock rebounds. After a 3.7% plunge during the viral scandal, Northern Pacific stock made an unexpected rebound. Investors who had feared a PR catastrophe were reassured by the speed and seriousness of the reforms. Bloomberg ran the headline, "Crisis Management Done Right. Brooks turns turmoil into blueprint." Daniel's inbox flooded with meeting requests. 3 other airlines wanted his reform protocol. 2 ride-sharing companies asked for consulting. A hotel chain wanted to license the bias detection software he helped build. The fire was now a movement. Hour 70, executive accountability triggered. In a packed emergency board session, the final and most sensitive reform item was presented: 20% of executive bonuses tied to diversity and inclusion performance metrics. Daniel didn't need to push. The board voted unanimously. CEO Patricia Langston released the internal memo herself. Starting this quarter, every executive at Northern Pacific Airlines will be accountable, not only for financial performance but for fair and equitable treatment of all passengers and employees. Hour 72, Daniel's office, final review. Daniel sat in his Chicago high-rise office overlooking Lake Michigan. His assistant, Maria Santos, entered with a binder labeled Northern Pacific Compliance Package. "Termination letter signed," she said. "Training rollout has reached 6,300 employees. Anonymous reporting is fully operational. Public apology exceeded engagement targets. And stock is up 2.9% since the reforms began." Daniel nodded slowly. "And the metrics?" Maria smiled. "Customer satisfaction ratings just jumped 14%. And internal complaints? Dropping already." Daniel flipped open the binder, reviewing everything with precision. His mind wasn't on celebration. It was on replication. "This is just the beginning," he said. Meanwhile, across the country, Angela Reed sat in her modest Brooklyn apartment, watching an online video of the training she had helped inspire. Her story, her voice, her pain, now being used to educate thousands. She wasn't a CEO. She wasn't a shareholder. But she mattered. She pulled out a notebook and began writing. Title: How to Speak Up When Systems Fail. The ripple had become a wave. Back at Terminal C-15, passengers now looked at the gate sign with different eyes. A young black man in a hoodie sat quietly near the window. No one questioned if he belonged. An elderly white couple watched him. The husband said softly, "You know who that reminds me of?" His wife smiled. "The man who made airlines listen." 3 weeks after Flight 983, Daniel Brooks stepped onto a stage that looked nothing like a gate terminal. This time, he wasn't boarding a plane. He was addressing a packed audience at the National Transportation Ethics Summit in Washington, D.C. The room was filled with airline executives, civil rights attorneys, policymakers, and press. The large screen behind him displayed a simple title: System Failure is Not a Glitch. It's Design. The standing ovation came before he spoke a word. Daniel approached the podium slowly, his tone measured but firm. 3 weeks ago, he began, I was removed from my seat on a commercial flight. Not because I didn't belong there, but because someone looked at my hoodie, my skin, my shoes, and decided I was in the wrong place. Murmurs of recognition moved through the crowd. But this isn't just about me, he continued. This is about the 5,200 discrimination complaints filed last year in U.S. airports, 92% of which were dismissed without action. This is about the woman in 22B who's asked if she speaks English. The man in 14A who searched 3 times while others walked past untouched. This is about everyone who's been told, you don't look like you belong. The room was silent. Behind him, the screen changed. It showed a line graph, a dramatic spike in social media mentions of transportation discrimination, starting the day of the Flight 983 incident. The trend didn't fade. It snowballed. Hashtag Northern Discrimination had triggered a ripple effect that became a global outcry. Daniel clicked to the next slide. In just 21 days, he said, our reform template has been requested by 7 major airlines, 3 national rail systems, 4 hotel chains, 2 ride-sharing platforms, and the Department of Transportation. A gasp. This wasn't just about an airline anymore. This was about changing infrastructure. He continued, the result is what we now call the Brooks Protocol, a 5-tier model for corporate accountability and bias prevention. It includes mandatory training, real-time reporting, third-party audits, accountability-based executive pay, and legal transparency. The slide behind him showed participating companies: Amtrak, Greyhound, Marriott, Lyft, Delta Airlines. Even Uber Eats had quietly begun training its delivery logistics staff using the protocol. Daniel smiled faintly. I didn't want to start a movement, he said. I wanted to take a flight. But maybe, just maybe, it's time we all stop just boarding planes and start charting new directions. Meanwhile, across the country, Angela Reed sat in a studio in Manhattan. CNN had invited her to discuss her role in the Brooks Protocol. Across from her was anchor Lana Torres. You were just a passenger, Lana said, who happened to give Mr. Brooks your story. Did you think it would lead to this? Angela smiled, blinking back tears. I didn't think anyone would even listen. She went on to share how her complaint, once buried, had now been reopened, investigated, and used as a case study for nationwide reform. Her voice quivered, but her words were steady. We don't need to be CEOs to change the system. We just need receipts, recordings, and resolve. The interview reached 3.5 million views in 24 hours. Daniel texted her that night. You didn't just tell your story. You lit the path for thousands. Back in Chicago, Daniel's assistant, Maria Santos, entered his office with a new report. She placed it gently on his desk. Mr. Brooks, here's what's happened since the protocol went public. He opened it. 42 airports had adopted third-party bias reporting systems. 3 airline CEOs had publicly tied bonuses to DI outcomes. The Department of Transportation was drafting federal guidelines nicknamed the Brooks Rules. And most impressively, discrimination complaints in aviation dropped 71% in 30 days. Daniel looked up. 71. Maria nodded. Verified. He leaned back in his chair and took a long breath. It wasn't just a reform. It was a course correction for an industry. In Memphis, Tennessee, the National Civil Rights Museum hosted a special panel, Airlines, Access, and Accountability. One of the keynote speakers, former flight attendant Sarah Connolly, the same woman who had told Daniel, Sir, this section is for premium passengers only. She stood before the audience, raw, open, changed. I thought I was being professional, she said. But professionalism without empathy is just another mask for bias. She went on to share her story of termination, counseling, and, ultimately, re-education. Today, she worked with Daniel's foundation as a bias training facilitator, helping companies avoid the very mistakes she made. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Daniel, watching from the back row, nodded silently. Transformation wasn't just for systems. It was possible for people, too. Back in D.C., Transportation Secretary Michael Raines signed a new federal order. Effective immediately, all commercial carriers operating in U.S. airspace must maintain public bias reporting systems, conduct annual equity audits, tie a portion of executive compensation to customer equity ratings, publish quarterly data on discrimination complaints. And at the bottom, based on the Brooks Protocol, 2025, Daniel received the signed order via email. His hand hovered over the screen for a long moment. One man, one incident, one boarding pass, and now one federal mandate. Across America, stories poured in. A Sikh passenger in Minneapolis who was finally heard after years of targeted screening. A single mom in Atlanta who was refunded and publicly apologized to after being removed without cause. A young Latina with a disability who received a formal apology and flight credit after being denied pre-boarding assistance. They weren't hashtags anymore. They were people. Real lives. Real change. In Daniel's office that night, he sat by the window as the city lights flickered below. He reread the last line from Angela's interview transcript. Change doesn't start in boardrooms. It starts with people saying, "This time, I'm not backing down." He picked up a pen and wrote a note on the whiteboard in front of him. Next step, global aviation standard. Because if they could change the skies in one country, why not the world? But as Daniel prepares to take the protocol global, one final call from a familiar voice reveals that his fight isn't over. It's only just begun. 2 months after Flight 983, the sky was unusually clear over Chicago. Daniel Brooks stood at Gate A7 of O'Hare International Airport, looking out the window at the aircraft waiting to board. Flight 983 again. Same route, same airline, same seat. But nothing else about this flight was the same. A young black flight attendant approached him with a respectful smile. His name tag read, David Walker. "Mr. Brooks," he said with warmth, "it's an honor to welcome you aboard. Your seat's ready, and we've prepared a few extra touches to make your flight more comfortable." Daniel smiled. "Thank you, David. I appreciate that." He walked down the jet bridge, not to prove anything this time, not to defend his seat, but because this flight now symbolized something greater. He was no longer the man forced to validate his presence. He was the reason the system itself had changed. Inside the cabin, he noticed the difference immediately. The flight crew was diverse. Young, old, black, Asian, Latino. There were women in captain's uniforms. A man in 3D wore a turban. A mother in 2A held her baby while her white husband reached for their bags. No one looked out of place. No one was being questioned. David placed a sealed envelope on Daniel's tray before takeoff. Daniel opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Mr. Brooks, because of you, I feel safe doing this job. Because of you, my nephew just got hired at an airline that would have ignored him last year. Because of you, I know my seat on this plane, and in this world, is not up for negotiation. Thank you. David." Daniel held the note for a long moment. Then the aircraft pushed back from the gate. On time. No cameras. No chaos. Just peace. 72 hours earlier, Daniel was at the Transportation Equality Foundation's headquarters in downtown Chicago. A new initiative was underway. His team was finalizing international licensing agreements to export the Brooks Protocol globally, first to British Airways, then to Singapore Airlines, and eventually into train and ferry systems in Europe. "What's the timeline?" Daniel asked. Maria Santos replied, "We'll have full deployment in 5 countries within 6 months." He nodded. Then his phone rang. "Caller ID, Patricia Langston." "Patricia," he answered. "Everything all right? I thought you should hear it from me," she said. "Your protocol just passed a vote at the International Civil Aviation Council. They're adopting it into global standards next quarter." Daniel exhaled, almost in disbelief. "Also," Patricia added, "the UN wants you to keynote their Transport Inclusion Forum in Geneva next spring." He laughed quietly. "That's a long way from getting kicked off a plane." She paused. "You changed the world, Daniel." He corrected her gently. "We changed the system. The world still needs more work." Back in Chicago, Daniel walked through the Foundation's hall, passing framed photos on the walls. Angela Reed, now a senior policy advisor. Dr. Leah Morris, teaching corporate DEI strategy. Even Sarah Connolly, the former flight attendant, now conducting bias training in 5 languages. He stopped in front of one final plaque, Flight 983, April 14, 2025. Below it, a single quote. Dignity doesn't ask for permission. It sits down, stays seated, and rewrites the rules. Daniel Brooks. In Memphis, at the National Civil Rights Museum, Daniel delivered the keynote address to a room of 800 attendees. Government officials, transportation execs, journalists, and students all listened in silence. This isn't a story about one airline, he began. It's a story about systems, and about what happens when enough people refuse to be polite about injustice. He clicked to a chart showing a 78% reduction in documented transportation discrimination complaints since the implementation of the Brooks Protocol. But numbers aren't enough, he said. We must commit not just to reaction, but to reimagination. Systems change when they are built not for profit alone, but for people. He gestured toward a girl seated in the front row. Her name was Naomi Carter, 14 years old. She had once been denied pre-boarding because she was blind and traveling without her parents. Today, she was an advocate, invited by the Department of Transportation to advise on accessibility policy. Naomi isn't a future leader, Daniel said. She's a now leader. The room exploded in applause. As Flight 983 descended into Seattle, Daniel glanced out the window as the coastline came into view. David, the flight attendant, came over once more. Sir, just wanted to say, I hope this flight meant something. It did, Daniel said quietly. Not because it was perfect, but because it didn't need to be a battle. He closed his laptop, where his final project document was ready. Title: Global Equality Through Transportation. Goal: Complete integration of equity protocols across all U.S. carriers and expand to 25 international carriers within 2 years. Phase 1, complete. Phase 2, scaling. Phase 3, legacy. The wheels touched down smoothly. Daniel looked around. No one stared at him. No one second-guessed his place. And for the first time since that unforgettable April morning, he felt the system was finally beginning to do what it was supposed to do: protect, serve, include. Weeks later, a quiet letter arrived at Daniel's office. No signature, just a note on cream stationery. I used to think power came from titles, wealth, and control. Now I know it comes from evidence, grace, and refusal to back down. Thank you for teaching me. A former opponent. Daniel folded the note and placed it next to the original boarding pass from Flight 983, now framed behind his desk. He turned to Maria. Ready for the next briefing? Always, she said. He smiled. Then let's fly. The real victory wasn't that Daniel Brooks reclaimed his seat. It was that he redefined what that seat represented for millions. It became a symbol, not just of resistance, but of redesign, of systems rebuilt from the inside out, of everyday dignity, enforced not by fear, but by structure. Because sometimes, the most powerful seat on the plane is the one someone told you didn't belong to you. If you've ever been told you don't belong, don't just prove them wrong. Change the rules they use against you. Subscribe for more stories of justice, transformation, and quiet power.